All right, so social psychology is usually broken into kind of two main areas that we can look at, or at least that we want to focus on. One is social cognition, and the other is social influence. All right, so social cognition refers to all the different processes that take place related to our thinking, right? So cognition, thinking, and how we process information about other people, right? So as we're in different social situations where other people are involved, what are the processes that we use to understand that situation, to understand other people, or what we also want to consider is how those other people or that situation are influencing our thoughts, right? So it's a two-way process, right? So with social cognition, there are a number of different kind of like sub-concepts that we would want to consider. One of the first ones that we're going to see is what we call person perception, right? So person perception are the impressions or judgments that we make about other people, and it's usually based on just their appearance. Okay, so these are generally the first impressions that we make. And the thing to recognize is that we all do this, all right? We all do it. And this can be a conscious thing, right? So we are aware of what we're doing. And this can be something like people watching, if you ever heard of that, okay? Or it could be something that is happening implicitly, right? Unconsciously. We're doing it without being aware of the fact that we're doing it, okay? But it does occur. And what we're doing is we're taking a little bit of information of what we can see about a person, right? And then we're drawing larger conclusions based on that limited amount of information, right? So a lot of this will depend maybe on the context or the situation in which we find a person or meet them for the first time. So for example, one of the things I always like to use as a framework is imagine riding public transportation, right? A subway, a bus, or something along those lines. What we're going to find is that as you get on to the subway car or to the bus, you're going to look for the open seats, and you're going to want to find somewhere where you can feel safe and comfortable, right? So we are usually making judgments about the other individuals that are already on that subway car or on that bus, right? And so we're not talking to these individuals. We're not getting any information from them directly. Rather, we're going off of what they look like, how they're dressed, grooming, sometimes how they smell, right? We're using limited amount of information to make certain assumptions about somebody, right? And it's dependent on the context, okay? At the same time, there are other people that we are able to interact with. We know them, right? We see how they behave. And so another way that we will engage in person perception and judging other people is we will look at how do they obey what we call social norms, okay? So a social norm is basically a rule or expectation of how you should behave in different social situations. Okay, this is the protocol to follow. This is what you're supposed to do. Okay, that's all well and good. However, what we see with social norms is that a lot of times no one ever actually teaches you these things. No one ever sits down and explains to you, this is the rule. This is what you're supposed to do in this situation. Rather, what tends to happen is that we have those situations and experiences over time, and we just kind of learn this is what you're supposed to do, okay? And so in large part, social norms, we completely like miss them until someone breaks one, and then we think to ourselves, what's wrong with them? Why did they do that? That's not how you do things, okay? So, for example, a very common one is you see somebody that you know, you're both heading somewhere, you're not stopping to talk to this person, you're just kind of greeting them, and you say to them, hey, how are you? And you expect them to say, good, how are you? Right? It is the absolute best day of their life, right? Everything's going great. They're going to say good. They might even say great. However, even if it is the worst day of their life, like things could not have been more terrible for them that day. Every single thing has gone wrong. One thing after another, after another, after another. And you say to them, hey, how are you? Unfortunately, we expect them to say, because of social norms, we expect them to say, good, how are you? Okay. Now, obviously, if we're going to sit down and actually have a conversation with them, that's something that's different, a completely different story. But if it's just in passing, it's just a kind of casual greeting, hey, how are you? We expect everyone to say, good, how are you? So imagine then if someone breaks that social norm, right? Imagine you're headed somewhere. You have a destination in mind, right? You're focused. And you say, hey, how are you? And they stop you and say, can I tell you, it has been the worst day. And they start going through and detailing everything. And in your mind, you're like, I didn't ask for this, right? I don't want to know all this, not right now, right? And so that's what we're talking about with social norms. These are the expected rules or expectations that we have in different social situations. And sometimes we're taught these things, but oftentimes we are not. Okay. Now, a few more concepts related to this social cognition and in particular with person perception. We also have this idea of what's the phrase is, what's beautiful is good. Okay. What's beautiful is good. So if we're judging other people based on their appearance and how they look, what we tend to do is place higher value and positive qualities to those that we consider more attractive. Okay, so the more attractive a person is, we tend to think things like they're smarter, right? They're happier, they're friendlier, they're more popular, right? We were more likely to give all these positive qualities to them that may or may not be true, right? But it's part of that person perception. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to see with this is that if we're making these first impressions about other individuals, sometimes with limited information, what we're going to find is that sometimes we are wrong about other people, right? We can be very, very wrong because we are operating on such a limited amount of data. And so this is where things like stereotyping come in, right? We're taking one little piece of information about somebody and then seeing how we can then apply that, right? Almost like what group can we put them into, right? We want to say they are this type of person. And if we can say they are this type of person, then we can automatically assume all the other qualities or characteristics about this individual, right? That's what stereotyping is. It's a mental shortcut to help us better understand other individuals, right? It's meant to help us be more aware as we meet people of how we can try to understand who they are. But again, we have to recognize that even though this is a natural tendency, it's a reflex, it's something that's going to happen, it can be very, very wrong. Okay. And this is where we have things like prejudice, right? We're judging people unfairly, right? And if prejudice is allowed to continue, then that leads to discrimination, the behaviors of treating people differently, right? So a lot goes into this, right? This is where a lot of bias comes in. Sometimes we're aware of the biases that we have against other people. Oftentimes we are not, right? There's an implicit bias. And there's so many things that we consider within that. We even want to look at things like social groups, right? Am I in the same social group as somebody? And how you define social groups can also be wildly varying in nature, right? So some kind of key takeaways from this, again, social cognition are thought processes and way of thinking of trying to understand other people or social situations, or how those other people or situations influence our thinking. And as we look at it, person perception is huge in this. It's something we all do. And what we want to do with that is be more aware of it so that we don't let it always influence us in a negative way as we have interactions with other people.